Welcome to the creepy parlor, where we delve into the dark side with an undercurrent of light-hearted fun. Our discussions will explore gothic, macabre, or creepy topics. The first Tuesday of every month, we will host a haunted happy hour where you can join us for a group conversation that focuses on ghosts, weird events, urban legends, and more. Here at the Creepy Parlor, our subject matter may be spooky, but our spirits are high. You can catch the Creepy Parlor every Tuesday at 7 p.m. Eastern, only on WLFE DB Radio.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Creepy Parlor. I'm Genevieve, and I am absolutely delighted to be your ghostess for the next hour. Tonight, we are going to discuss widow's weeds, Victorian mourning traditions, and Memento Mori. And I'm very excited about my guest this evening. We are featuring Mother de la Morte. She's also known as Odd Mother. She is the founder of Psychomantium 13, Psycho Bunny DC. She's a mixed media artist, and she enjoys creepy history, so she's going to fit right in tonight. So welcome to Mother de la Morte. Hello.
Hi, and thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. I'm so thrilled that we finally got to do this.
Oh, me too. I am so down for this. This is right up my alley, as you can tell.
Well, I have dressed in my widow's weeds for the evening. I have my veil, I have my morning dress on. So, what girl doesn't have a morning dress in her closet?
Well, and you look absolutely fabulous this evening, Genevieve.
Thank you. So do you. So let's get into it. So the Victorian period is actually strictly defined by the period that Queen Victoria reigned England. That was from 1837 to 1901. And one of the really interesting things about Queen Victoria is that when her husband Albert died, she mourned him for 40 years. And she really sort of set the fashion of the time and a lot of the trends at the time as well. And I mean, this woman absolutely mourned that man. She actually never wore her imperial crown after he passed because she wore her weeping veil throughout the rest of her life. Isn't that fascinating?
You're absolutely right. And there was a lot of money to be made actually at the time in mourning wear at that point, because like you said, Queen Victoria kind of set the stage, and there were quite a few companies that made a fortune off death.
Oh, I'm sure. I mean, not just the they still do today, right? Just with the fashion, but also with all of the art, with the photographs, with the Memento Mori, which we can get into in a little bit, but most particularly with women's dresses.
Oh yeah, and they were absolutely gorgeous. I mean, I could not even want to imagine having to carry that around on my body, but they're beautiful. They're absolutely beautiful.
So I do have some photographs. We were really lucky a few years back. One of the museums in New York City hosted a Death Becomes Her exhibit, and they really delved into a lot of the Victorian mourning dresses. So my best friend, she's an amazing photographer, she sent me a bunch of pictures to show. So I can show some of those. This one right here is one of my favorites.
I think that's one of my favorites as well.
Yeah. And what's really interesting about the fashion throughout mourning is that it had different codes for each level of mourning. So when a woman lost her husband, I believe she had to mourn for 2.5 to 3 years. Am I correct on that?
I think you are. There are some exceptions. Like any region or what have you, they may be a little stricter on some things than others. But yeah, I had read something about that too. It was like 2 years, and then they can go into like a semi-mourning. And then at that point in semi-mourning, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, they have to do another 2 years of that. So it works out to be about 3 or 4 years. It was insane.
And it's what's really, I think a little bit messed up is that the men were only required to mourn for about 3 to 6 months for their wife.
Exactly. And any dark suit would work. Really, their only regulation for that 6 month period would be like a ribbon, a black ribbon that would be worn around one of the arms, like an armband. But yeah, they had it a lot easier, I do believe, when it came to traditional requirements with things like that.
And I think too, I mean, just I'm wearing only the top of my dress right now. I have a different bottom on, but the way that it constricts everything. So these poor women weren't just mourning; they were being like really tied into their clothes as well.
They were, and the crazy thing about it is, and we're of course right at this moment talking about the people of means, that there were multiple deaths in the home. In a lot of cases, if it was going to be a long mourning period, they pretty much packed all their clothes up and were required to have a new mourning wardrobe for those time periods, unless it was like, the whole family had passed at one time or within like a week. Then it was a little bit more acceptable. But yeah, I mean, there was just so much that went into that. And even the jewelry was required to be of certain, like the jet, and a lot of that kind of stuff. It was
Really
beautiful, but odd. Yeah.
Yeah, that really like flat black. A lot of the fabrics were that like heavy crepe that didn't have a lot of reflection in them. And one of the other things that I came across too while I was looking this up, and just so you guys all know out there, I kind of look up this stuff for fun too. And this kind of this collaboration kind of came out of a mutual interest for both mother and I.
It's like, what do you do in your off time? Well, let me tell you.
I mean, everyone has to have a hobby.
But
true. One of the articles that I was reading is that oftentimes the veils that women wore had a lot of toxic components in them. They were used,
they did.
Heavy metals were used to dye them. They had a lot of particulate matter that would come off, and these women would be inhaling all of those toxins as they're still mourning, they're still grieving the loss, but now they're also being complicated with that as well. And
exactly.
Go ahead.
And not to mention the fact that during this time, it was a heightened period of sickness as far as consumption. A lot of people were dying from consumption, to the point that, again, this particular disease, which eventually in most cases caused death, became fashionable. It was very fashionable to look as if you were suffering from consumption, because it would give you a very pale look, very rosy cheeks, to the point that I did not know this, but did you know that even during Victorian times, as strict as they were on so many things, that tattooing was like a secret pleasure, to the point that they even sometimes had that blushed look would be lightly tattooed onto their face.
Really?
Yeah.
That I didn't know.
Yeah.
The one thing that I knew about tuberculosis or consumption was that they a lot of times it was associated with artists and writers and things like that, and that's why the upper class really wanted to be associated with having tuberculosis, because it was so associated with the arts. And
that's very true. It was in fashion, if you could say such a thing.
Isn't that's wild to me? Absolutely wild. But it also goes back to the fact that during the Victorian era, there was so much death. I mean, people were living right alongside with death, and that's where we get a lot of those beautiful gravestones that we talked about a couple weeks ago when Brenda joined us. We have a lot. It's death was just as much a part of life as breathing and eating dinner.
It really was, and like I had to print this out just because there's so much like like, I don't want to say useless information, but random information in my brain that I have to actually write certain things down. But yeah, back during that time period, people need to understand too, or because we've gotten so far away from death and so displaced
Yes.
from it,
Mhm.
that during that time period, 60% of children normally did not make it. So it was very, very common. And working class families, like if a child made it past their fifth birthday, that was something. If laborers lived to be over 22, that was something. And most tradesmen didn't live to be over 25. So that's a lot going
That's
on.
staggering. That's absolutely staggering
Yeah.
when you think about it. And you have people essentially being touched by death pretty commonly.
Weekly.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
Probably. Which brings me to another thing, another really interesting thing. And I have to say, I have to admit, I think the Victorians did a whole lot of really amazing things right in terms of fashion and architecture and things like that. A lot of things they probably didn't do so well. But I think mourning and I think the architecture that they created was probably two of their greatest contributions.
They
really
took a sad thing and put class behind it, if that makes any sense. Like they just had a very traditional. I don't know. I know what you're saying. Yeah.
And from someone of this era, looking back at that, and having gone through periods of grief myself, the thing that I really appreciate about it is that when someone was in mourning, it was very clearly identified. You could very clearly say that person's in mourning, and maybe support them a little bit differently, or at least acknowledge that they were in mourning. Whereas now we're sort of expected to go about our day like nothing happened.
Well, it in some ways it did, I do believe, take some stress off people in general, because you knew what to do and what not to do. And like you said, we're so far removed from it now that a lot of times people don't really know how to approach someone that has had a death in their family or a close death. They don't know what to say. They don't really know how to behave. And at least this structure kind of gave you a playbook on, this is something you're going to have to deal with often. And this is what we've all accepted as kind of a way to interact with those people, let them know that you care, but not push boundaries, if that makes sense.
Yep. I just wanted to bring our attention to Kathleen's comment here, family picnics on grave sites. Quite a few years back, I learned that that's where wrought iron furniture came from. People were having wrought iron furniture made to set up at their family grave sites, and they would just go and sit and have dinner or have conversations with their family. And what a lovely way to keep your ancestors with you.
It really is. And the Victorian park cemeteries, I mean, we could go down a rabbit hole into the difference between graveyards and cemeteries and how cemeteries came to be. But the Victorian cemetery itself, just for our supporters and viewers, if you have not had the pleasure of visiting a Victorian cemetery, it is designed, I mean, it is specifically designed to have picnics, to spend a day there. That they have reflecting ponds and benches and things like that. And I would definitely take advantage of it, because they're gardens. They really are, and they're beautiful if they're maintained.
Absolutely. Just gotta say hi to Doomsday real quick. Hi, Doomsday.
Hi, Mikey.
So we did talk a little bit about the people, the more wealthy people that could afford to invest in all of these beautiful clothes. And I have a few more pictures that I want to show because these are magnificent. Look at these.
They're beautiful.
Yeah. And here we've got this one. This is probably my favorite.
I mean, everything, it seems like, had thought into it back then, it's just,
yeah,
I don't know.
And once again, thank you to Karen for sending me all these pictures, because they're just so beautiful.
Aren't they? Oh my goodness.
Yeah, when we went to this exhibit, I was literally walking around in circles going, I want that one, I want that one, I want that one. But when you look at this one, there's a man in the background, and he's probably dressed in his regular suit. It just so happens.
Most likely. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. This one's interesting because we have two women here, and you can see a child and a man in the background, because children were expected to dress in mourning as well.
They were. And, you know, in my research, I found that it did, with children, it actually evolved. It went from white, which was supposed to maintain their innocence and things like that, to, I would say, probably at the height of the what I call the death culture, because they really were. I mean, it was a death culture, and I'm sorry, to me it was beautiful, but to me, and then they went to the stark black and then half mourning and all that kind of stuff. But I don't think the time period was quite as strict for the children, but there were rules there too.
Oh, absolutely. We can talk about the funeral. Let's play funeral in a moment, but let me just show a few more pictures because I think they're so cool. Look at that one. Look at those two.
I love that.
Here we go. The favorites again.
Now, see, these are my favorite because you can see that we're moving into like the Edwardian phase that would come about towards the end of Queen Victoria's reign. But she still had a lasting effect on the styles. But yes, these are lovely.
Aren't they beautiful?
They are.
And on the one hand, as much as I think they're so beautiful and I would love to dress like that, as I sit here wearing this, I'm like, oh, it's so oppressive.
2 hours. I'd wear it for 2 hours.
Exactly. But imagine like doing, hand washing things, you doing your laundry by hand and doing all of the things that women did by hand, wearing all of this.
I couldn't. And I would probably say that the ones of means, again, a lot of times you see in the old movies and things like that they always withdrew to the sewing room or the sitting room or what have you. And like their talents were needlepoint and sewing and things that didn't require a lot of moving around. But yeah, I couldn't imagine having to do daily household things.
It's amazing,
like that.
Isn't
it is.
One of the other things I found really interesting too is that the way that you mourned, the way that you showed that you were mourning, required a lot of money, and it was almost like a social status symbol to be able to have all of these dresses and have different dresses for each death that you had in the family, and to have different dresses just for different time periods. Whereas the women who did not have a lot of money really had a totally different way of managing it. And oftentimes they would take their best dress, which was usually their wedding dress, and have it dyed.
Exactly. And you could take handkerchiefs, or I guess they would call them handkerchiefs during that time for women. But, of course, your little dainty handkerchief, and just sew some black piping around the outside would be one of the things that they could do to turn that particular item into an acceptable mourning item.
It's amazing to me. And the other thing that I was also reading a little bit about too is that, of course, like the more that you were able to mourn as a woman, it signified the more the higher status you had socially. The women who had to remarry within 6 months to a year were the ones that needed that income from a man. So they did not have that social standing. So
exactly. And not to really get off point too much, but yeah, I mean, other than death, for a woman, regardless of what status you were from, divorce was extremely rare. There was so much that had to be proven on behalf of the woman seeking a divorce versus the man, which was normally only infidelity that he had to prove, whereas she would have to prove infidelity, incest, abuse. I mean, just all kinds of crazy stuff. And then that kind of gets into a whole nother subject where sometimes it was often easier to proclaim your wife as a lunatic and insane than it was to divorce, because again, you got to keep all her property and stuff. Yeah.
And sometimes it was easier for a woman to poison her husband.
This is true. This is true. But when we were talking the other day, you brought up something that I found, like I learned from. But that what were you saying? Something about it was quite attractive to men when women,
Yes.
unfortunately, were going through these mourning periods.
One of the things that I came across is that apparently this look was very attractive to men. I'm not quite sure why. But one of the reasons why they claimed that women should wear the veils for the first year was to sort of protect her so that people didn't have to see that she was crying. But they, as I got further into that, apparently it was also to keep them away from, to sort of deflect male interest as well. One of the quotes that I saw, go ahead.
I was just going to say, which would make completely sense, because one of the things that was required was that you withdraw yourself from society, any type of social goings on for at least, like you said, 6 months to a year, if not longer.
Yes. One of the interesting things that we saw at the Death Becomes Her exhibit, two things actually were really interesting. One was a quote that was something, and I'm completely misquoting this, but it was something to the effect of the widow's eyes and how alluring a young widow's eyes are. And it was a quote from a man just talking about how attractive it was for a woman to be a widow.
That is so bizarre.
I know, it's interesting. And then the other thing that I saw, just to give you a little bit of context, is that widows were threatening to other wives because of this. There was like a New Yorker cartoon or something like that posted up at the exhibit, and it was this widow sitting on this beautiful sofa, and she's got her head like this, and she's covered in her veil, and then there's women on the side being all catty saying, oh, she's going to take her husband now. It was really interesting because I never thought of it that way. That whole social.
I didn't either. And I tell you, when you were telling me about that, I was so amazed, because I love learning new information. But yeah, it did seem very bizarre, but at the same time, and again, it could just be like a social thing to where we've been kind of socially trained to, this is attractive and this is not attractive and what have you. But just from a fashion standpoint, I mean, I've got to say, the clothing was beautiful. So I can see how that would be appealing, if that makes sense.
Yes. Having been a goth girl most of my life, I can totally see that as well. Here's Sarah's comment. I clearly remember hearing stories of my great-grandmother in Italy having to wear black and a veil for 1 year following a death. Absolutely. It was very common. Very, very common. My sister telling me I look like Sophia from Golden Girls. Stop it, Jillian.
We love Jillian.
Yes, we do. So when you think about it too, there was just so much difference between now and then in regards to death, which I know we've sort of delved into that too, but even, it did not spare anybody. It affected the poor, it affected the wealthy, it affected the adults, the children, so much so that children would actually play funeral.
Oh, they would. It was not uncommon for your doll to come with mourning attire and its little coffin and all that kind of stuff, because I guess it was a way of teaching coping skills would be the best way to say it.
And prepare, it's sort of like, play in children sets them up for proper social interactions when they're when they're adults. So it would make sense that they would play funeral, considering how many funerals they would probably attend, right?
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Because like you said, I mean, it was just so close to home. I mean, so close to home. Um, in comparison to today, because back then, like you said, it was something that everyone was affected by, and now we've just so separated ourselves that you don't see that many graveyards and cemeteries. It's all like memorial parks and things like that now, which to me is just kind of like more of a sanitizing of something that is going to touch us all at some point.
Absolutely. And also when you consider too that a lot of times funerals were held in people's homes.
They were, and I would love to talk about that some more. I know you got a commercial break coming up, but
we'll
I would love to talk about that. Yeah.
I just want to acknowledge Mikey's comment. The ladies in those black funeral dresses did look attractive. Still do. Black is slimming. Black is fantastic. I highly agree that these dresses are magnificent. We are going to take a quick commercial break, and then we'll come back and delve into that some more of the dark side. Hang out with us for a few minutes, guys. We'll be right back.
"2021 just got better. Your favorite shows from WLFE DB Radio can now be found on Facebook Live and YouTube Live. Yes, we now video stream to both of those platforms. Search for your favorite shows like Where's My Sage, Inside the Drag Closet, Across the Pond, Everything Yet Nothing, Paratalk Radio, Step into the Paranormal, The Creepy Parlour, Just Cindy, and more. Now you won't miss an episode. Remember, follow Facebook Live and YouTube Live. Make sure you subscribe and follow your favorite WLFE DB radio shows. This award-winning thriller has it all. Murder, political intrigue, mob revenge, and a bit of romance. Not to mention strong female and male characters with a storyline that could be tomorrow's headline news. Now for a quick peek into our story. To help solving a nationwide plot involving the assassination of several U.S. senators, the O'Rourke team is called in. To complicate matters, they now have to work against the clock to rescue one of their own. You see, the mob didn't take too kindly to the O'Rourke team's involvement last spring. It seems to have led to the indictment of their boss. Will they succeed? You're listening to WLFE DB Radio. Now, back to our program.
Ta-da! Hey! It's me, Nix, the Psycho Mantis, coming to you live from Psycho Mantium 13. Join us here throughout the week for all things in audio, visual, and literary content. You can also find us on the World Wide Web at psychomantium13.com. Join Psychomantium 13 and enter the weird.
I just love that video so much, and I'm so glad it played this time. It is the cutest.
And my daughter actually drew the little mantis.
That makes it even cooler. You got a little artist on your hands.
Yes.
So where were we? Were we talking about funerals now?
We were talking about funerals and some of the things they did and some of the things that actually kind of carried on into the 20th century.
Yes. Would you like to take the lead on that?
Sure, sure. So this kind of down my alley. One of the things that we don't see so much now, but it does go into, and I know you have just an absolute passion for it. Um, One of the things that they would do, because photography was usually only for the people that were in a position to be able to afford it, um, they would do what are called graveyard dolls or grave dolls. And a
Mhm.
lot of times, what they would do is they would have wax effigies. So if you ever find a doll that is made of, like, the skin and stuff is paraffin, and they hold up a lot better than people realize, that's probably a grave doll. Normally, they would take the hair of the deceased, often a child in this case, and that hair would be used to make the hair for the doll. In most cases, the doll would be a likeness of the child, and it would be left at the graveside. That didn't always happen. They were sometimes brought home and kept in a box, and even sometimes kept in a bassinet and changed
Wow.
regularly, if it was the loss of a very, very young child. Um, but yeah, that's just kind of one of the things that they did to kind of remember people. And then your photography became a little bit more. Um, it, it, it was accessible to people of say middle class, and things like that. And that's even some of our viewers may remember, old family albums and seeing pictures taken at funerals. It did kind of trickle down from the 19th century.
And if you've ever seen any of those photographs that were taken, there's a whole genre of Victorian mourning photographs, and you'll see
Hmm.
photographs of family members, and the deceased will be sort of kind of propped up with the family,
Hmm.
and it's easy to think that that's macabre and that that's disturbing and things like that. But when you look at it from their perspective, they didn't have cell phone cameras. They didn't have access to photography the way that we do. It took a long time to create a photograph. Um, we're kind of spoiled right now. We have a lot of images of our loved ones that we can just sort of at our fingertips, right? They didn't really
Exactly.
have that. And oftentimes the only time that they really had a photograph taken with their family is when somebody passed away. And that's what they had to remember them by. So, yeah, I think that
Hmm.
it's a little creepy, but when you look at it from their perspective, it's understandable.
Oh, it absolutely is. And I do think that it's part, and again, not to go down a rabbit hole, but I do love history. It's part of the human condition. From the time that we stood upright, we made jewelry out of bone and
Hmm.
all kinds of weird things through time. But this is just kind of part of it, and that goes along with, like, the hair jewelry,
Hmm.
um, and using the deceased or loved one's hair for embroidery patterns and just all kinds
Hmm.
of things. But if you ever see one, they're beautiful. They're absolutely beautiful.
They are absolutely beautiful, and I think one of the issues that really is at the heart of it is that being human, we know that we're mortal. We know that we're going to
Hmm.
die, which that's where the
Hmm.
term Memento Mori comes from. Remember that you will die, and that
Hmm.
knowing that we probably try to cling onto our mortality as a source of immortality. I feel, having those images, having the hair jewelry, it's keeping that person alive and with you.
Agreed, because I do, from an artist standpoint, I do believe that the human species, we are a tactile and visual species, and so
Hmm.
that makes a lot of sense, I guess. Like, and again, I'm not a psychologist or anything like that, but on a psychological level, it makes a whole lot of sense to me.
Oh, absolutely. And so that brings us to some of that stuff too. Um,
Hmm.
one of the other things that I really appreciate too that was very customary is that when there was a death in the home, they would create a wreath, and they would hang that on the front door, and that would signify to people in the neighborhood that they had a death in the family. But oftentimes they would use bits of hair and or things like buttons and pieces of clothing and things like that from the deceased to incorporate that into the wreath.
They would, and honestly, I remember at least not so much the hair wreaths and things like that, but the laurel wreaths.
Oh
I can
yeah.
remember those from even when I was young, from down here in the South. You still have a lot of leftover stuff in a lot of ways when it comes to that kind of thing. I think a lot of that we lost with like the generation of like World War II, because they were kind of the last generation to be touched by the generation of that time. But there were certain things, wreaths, types of food, the wakes at the home, different things like that that were very commonplace. Even,
There's
I mean, I can remember them.
there's a lot that well, you're 475 years old, right?
Well, this is true, so.
But there, yeah, that's true though. In accordance with all of the traditions and things like that, there were a lot of recipes for funeral cakes that I came across, funeral cookies, things that people, very specific dishes that people would make for the bereaved families. One of my favorites, I mentioned this when we were talking the other night. One of my favorites is this amazing chocolate cake that's got cinnamon and coffee in it, and it's topped with a cinnamon whipped cream, and it's an actual recipe for an Egyptian funeral cake. And
it sounds delicious.
It is delicious. And every time I make it, people are like, "Oh, this is wonderful. What is it?" And I'm like, "It's an Egyptian funeral cake." It just solidifies my weirdness.
See, and most people would probably be like, I would be like, how cool is that? Give me a second piece.
Hi, Teddy. How are you?
Hi, Ted.
This is my friend Jennifer, who is a mortician's apprentice. She says, looking back at the old files in the funeral home, a lot of them have at home for a place of viewing in the early on in the days. Looking back. Oh, yeah, absolutely. A lot of that stuff. There's so much history with the funerals. Do we want to get into superstitions, or do we want to talk more about jewelry? I want to talk about jewelry, if you don't mind.
Let's talk about jewelry, but I did want to comment on that. One of our houses, which was built in, I believe, 1907, which is on that latter end. It is on that latter end. Yes. But she's absolutely right. In a lot of the old homes, there was always a section there that's just about the length of a coffin and just about the width of a coffin. In our case, it was beside the stairs in what you would consider like the living room, I guess, or the sitting room, maybe. Yeah.
Yeah, and some houses even had coffin doors.
Yeah,
you
exactly.
Actually bring the coffins out the doors, so you didn't go through the other doors. So again, one of the things that I really find absolutely intriguing and beautiful and such a lovely tribute is that hair jewelry and the artwork that they would make with that. One of the common things, excuse me, one of the more common things that I've seen are bracelets made with braided hair. And they weren't just braided like a simple braid. You've seen them. They're like 7 or 8 layers of braids. They're absolutely beautiful.
And honestly, some of that, like, I don't see how the craftsman, not anybody could just do this. It's just so intricate. How they did not go blind, because some were so small, and they would honestly be pulled out in a way to where, especially like the brooches and the little brooches that would go right here, would be pulled out and like the fan to look like leaves and different things like that. I mean, so meticulous and so beautiful. And if you're lucky enough, sometimes you can still find them on eBay.
And if you look really closely at some antique shops, you can find them as well.
Yeah.
There was a fantastic antique shop in a town not too far from us called Teardrop Memories, and they had an entire section of all hair art and hair jewelry. It was magnificent. It was absolutely magnificent. But that's
I would be in there for hours.
Yeah, you would be. That's something I've noticed has been making a bit of a comeback lately. Have you noticed this?
I have. I think people are more receptive to it, if that sounds,
Hmm.
yeah, I have. It seems like people are more receptive to it. Not quite so much of a, well, I don't want to say taboo because I don't know. I mean, hopefully death never ever gets to a point to where it's considered taboo, but yeah, it's gotten close though. Yeah.
It is. One of the things that makes me think of the Victorians. I don't know if you've seen, but lately they people are making. You can actually make diamonds out of human cremains. Have you seen that?
I've seen that. I've seen diamonds, the tattoos.
Hmm.
Honestly, I want a mother's ring with my little one's baby teeth.
I think
A lot of
that's
people say,
beautiful.
"Ooh, that's
Oh,
weird," but I don't know.
like right on cue. There's Jillian. She wants some tooth jewelry.
Yeah.
um, but there's a lot of artisans out there now too that are doing different like actual Victorian hair jewelry and placing hair wraps into like underneath stones and things like that. There's some really absolutely
Hmm.
amazing things being done out there. Um, and go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, and talking about Memento Mori art, actually, one of my most dear pieces that I ever did for a client was actually, it was like today's version of a Memento Mori doll, to where we had her father's ashes enclosed in like a sacred heart that would open,
Oh, that's
and
beautiful.
inside that I had a glass vial that was filled with her father's ashes. It was a different experience to do something like that, but very heartfelt. Like, I don't know, that's just it's so personal.
And it's also like you're doing a service for that. It's more than just creating a piece of art. You're assisting them with their process, and I think that's absolutely
Exactly.
magnificent. It's beautiful. It's beautiful if you can do that.
Hmm.
Here's Angie's comment. She's gonna make some remains jewelry when a loved one passed. Love the idea of keeping them with me that way. Absolutely, and it definitely is a way that helps process the passing. I know some people that do jewelry with cremains from pets, and they're
Hmm.
absolutely beautiful. But it really is making a bit of a comeback as well.
It really is, because you don't want to forget your loved ones, and it was almost like that was kind of expected. So I'm glad that it's coming back around to where it's we're exposing ourselves a little bit more to it.
I think so, and I think there's a whole death positive movement, which is a topic for a completely different night. But it really is it really is shifting a lot of that negative. I mean, we're all going there at some point, right? Um,
Exactly. The great equalizer.
Absolutely. Um, so let's get back to the Victorians because we only have a few more minutes. I can't believe this time goes so fast, so
And
fast.
I'm great about going down rabbit holes, so.
Yes, yes, I know. Rabbit holes are some of the best places. Um, so one of the things that I did recently, because my ghost tour business was just in the hopper this year with coronavirus. So I was trying to do more outreach and more virtual events. And one of the things that I hosted this year was a Victorian mourning tea. So I did some research on that. And basically, that was sort of a loophole for women to be able to socialize within the first year of
Hmm.
mourning. So they weren't necessarily allowed to go to their normal social events, but they could have these high teas with their close friends or their close family, and have these events that gave them the option to socialize. So
Oh.
I hosted one back for Halloween, and it was a lovely, lovely little event. We got together, we drank tea, and we told really wonderful stories of people that we love that have passed over. And it was just nice. It's nice to have those.
That sounds amazing.
I'm gonna do it again. I will let you know when I do it
I
again.
would. I absolutely would. I would make it a yearly tradition.
I think so. I had wanted to do it in person, but obviously that did not happen this year. That did not happen. So anyway, back to those lovely Victorians. And something that we can thank them for as well. So any thoughts on the
Oh, absolutely.
any thoughts on some of the superstitions surrounding death at that time?
Oh my
'Cause I
goodness,
got a lot of
there were
thoughts.
so there were so many. Of course, some of the mainstream ones were, covering the mirrors, stopping the clocks. There were reasons for that. And then you get to some that were very obscure, like, the person, when you were carrying them out to be taken to the cemetery, had to go out feet first. They could not go out head
Mhm.
first because you did not want them, looking at the home and returning. There are some, superstitions that go into like the widow's weeds and the veils, that it would,
Mhm.
because you want to appear as a shadow,
Yes.
rather than a human,
Mhm.
so that you would not be as appealing to the dead.
I think that's really interesting too, because it's almost like you're sort of melting into the background when you're wearing this, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah.
I am particularly interested in the covering the mirrors, because I remember my grandmother talking about that when I was younger, and I never quite understood it as a kid. Like, why would you cover the mirrors? But then on further research, learning that people believed that the soul of the dead could be trapped in that mirror.
Mm-hmm.
And the
Yeah,
same with
and
photographs.
again, not to go down a rabbit hole, but mirror superstitions go back to the dawn of time.
I remember you talking a little bit about that on one of your shows.
Yeah, yeah.
See, I do my homework. But I am really, I mean, coming from having grown up with the Irish Catholic grandmother and stuff, I'm particularly interested in a lot of those superstitions, because some of them are just so interesting, and you don't know where they come from, and it just gets like sort of scooped into your life. I mean, they would put photographs down, face down, so that
Mm-hmm.
the photographs wouldn't become possessed. I mean, it's just, and that sort of goes along with the whole idea that when, and you barely hear this anymore, but when you get your photograph taken, it takes part of your soul,
Mm-hmm.
and you don't really hear much
Yeah,
about that
and
anymore.
you don't, and you don't hear a lot about, kind of going back to like just how lucrative the whole death culture was, and these strict
Oh yeah.
traditions, is that many an animal either did go extinct or almost went extinct because of tradition requirements and superstitions, such as the ostrich feathers. Ostrich feathers were believed to, yeah,
There's one
to
on my
to
hat.
um, be a sort of protection, so to speak, and also, acceptable in those strict guidelines of what you were and were not supposed to wear.
It's fascinating, isn't it? I mean, to have that much influence over someone's personal choice while they're at their darkest moment.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And who was dictating
But
this?
yeah, it's just it was all, I think a lot of it, like you said. I mean, of course, Queen Victoria kind of got it started. I don't
Mhm.
think she intended to by any means, but it was a way to show your standing, and but also I think that, like you said too, it was, kind of a way to socially help people on what they should and should not do. So
I think so too, but I think it's we still suffer from that today, with people trying to show their social standing by the things they have and the things that they do. I think that's a lot of that is kind of human nature as well, unfortunately.
I do. I think it is.
Yeah. This comment for your Kisa, put 2 coins on the eyes to pay the ferryman. Absolutely. That's
and those traditions still kind of hang on today. Maybe not so much, but they're still there.
So we only have a few more minutes. I'm trying to see if anybody's got any questions. Anybody have any questions or any personal experiences that they want to share? Feel free to comment. One of the other things that I love about this too is, and we can get more into this tomorrow when we talk again, because we're going to do this tomorrow night too, is that the Victorian era is really when ghost stories became popularized.
They were, and most people don't realize it was actually tradition to tell them at Christmas.
Yes. And I'm just doing some shameless self-promoting here, but I do a Christmas past ghost tour as well. I'm just being shameless tonight. I'm sorry.
No, it's quite all right. Don't think I'm not going to get shameless here in a minute when we talk about tomorrow night. So.
But I think, and it's I don't think it's a coincidence that a lot of the stories that we still tell today really are set in that Victorian era, whether it's because, they were just so over the top with the way they mourned. Maybe that's what keeps them around, or just the fact that, so many people are just so drawn to that time period. I'm not sure what it is.
Well,
but
and it was a weird time period too, because it was like leaving the time of superstition and going into the time of like actual medicine in the Industrial Revolution. So it was a way to still hang on to the past, but move forward in the future, I do believe too.
I completely agree with that. And I think that that's a very interesting perspective on that as well, because they really were, that's one of the most common ways of preserving history is through storytelling. So it's really just one of the most powerful ways to keep that history alive. And I think that that's amazing. It's certainly one of the things that really draws me to telling stories and keeping that stuff going.
And in hoping, like we were talking the other night, that even some of the interest in like you said, in home wakes are coming back. So I do hope that we move forward in a positive direction with that. So
I think we are, and I think that again we can go a whole night talking about the death positive movement, but there's a lot there that really keeps us connected with our ancestors, keeps us connected with people that we love that have gone on, rather than sort of just having that disconnect and they're gone.
Exactly.
Well, we only have about 3 more minutes left, so I would like you to do some shameless self-promotion as well, since I got mine in.
Okay, let's see. You can find us on PBDC TV, and that's the easiest way to get to either one of our channels, which is Psycho Bunny Death Cult or Psychomantium 13. We will be carrying this on over on Psychomantium 13 tomorrow night at 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So please join us. We'll be doing this again. So I'm just super excited. So
there, we got a little banner going for us for tomorrow. So yeah, you can definitely check it out. Definitely check it out tomorrow. Check out, there's so much great content also on PBDC TV. Lots of great shows. We have a lot of great shows here on WLFE. Next week, we're going to be talking a little bit about for St. Patrick's Day, we're going to be talking about the darker side of Ireland, some of the haunts, some of the, hopefully we'll get into some banshee talk next week. Yeah, a lot of cool stuff going on here at the Creepy Parlor. And I just want you guys to know too that we've got quite a few different shows on WLFE. Check them out on Facebook. You can check us out on WLFEDB.com. I can't do initials tonight. WLFEDB. creepypodcast.com, and you can watch all of our shows streaming there too. So that's really exciting. Very, very excited about that. But definitely check us out on Facebook. You can check me out at the Creepy Parlour on Facebook. We have Instagram. Follow, share, do all that fun stuff. We really, really appreciate it. We do this for the love of doing it, and the more people that watch, the happier we are. Right?
All the time.
Well, Odd Mama, I want to thank you so much for joining me this evening, and I'm really looking forward to tomorrow.
Me too, and thank you so much for having me. This has been an absolute blast.
We can talk about death all night. Thank you again, and guys, please hang out on WLFE. We have Where's My Sage coming up. A lot of great shows coming up, so please check them out. And that's all that we have for this evening. So, my creepy darlings, I hope to see you next week. And I definitely hope to see you tomorrow night as well. Thank you for joining. Have a wonderful evening. Well, there we go.
Thank you for joining us on the Creepy Parlour. Join us next Tuesday at 7 p.m. Eastern for another fantastic show.